Hello, welcome to the Self Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start discussion on Chapter 2 Cultural Change, and our topic is Westernization. You have already read about our Western colonial past. You have seen how it often brought about changes that were paradoxical and strange. Aman Srinivas defines Westernization as the changes brought about in the Indian society and culture as a result of over 150 years of British rule. The term subsuming changes occurring at different levels: technology, institutions, ideology, and values. There were different kinds of westernization. One kind refers to the emergence of a westernized subcultural pattern through a minority section of Indians who first came in contact with Western culture. This included the subculture of Indian intellectuals who not only adopted many cognitive patterns or ways of thinking and styles of life but supported its expansion. Many of the early 19th century reformers were of this kind. There were therefore very small sections of people who adopted Western lifestyles or were affected by Western ways of thinking. Apart from this, there has been also the general spread of Western cultural traits, such as the use of new technology, dress, food, and changes in the habits and styles of poor in general. Across the country, a very wide section of middle class homes have a television set, a fridge, some kind of sofa set, a dining table, and chair in the living room. Westernization does involve the imitation of external forms of culture. It does not necessarily mean that the people adopt modern values of democracy and equality. Apart from ways of life and thinking, the West influenced Indian art and literature. Artists like Ravi Verma, Abhindranath Tagore, Chandu Menon, and Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay were all grappling with the colonial encounter. Technique and the very theme of an artist like Ravi Verma were shaped by Western and indigenous traditions. It discusses the portrait of a family in a matrilineal community of Kerala, but one that significantly resembles the very typical patrilineal nuclear family of the modern West, consisting of a father, mother, and children. You can see the many diverse levels that cultural change resulting from our colonial encounter with the West took place. In the contemporary context, often conflicts between the generations are seen as cultural conflicts resulting from Westernization. The following account in the next page captures this gap. Have you seen this or faced this? Is Westernization the only reason for generational conflict? Are conflicts necessarily bad? Srinivas suggested that while lower caste sought to be Sanskritized, upper caste sought to be Westernized. In a diverse country such as India, this generalization is difficult to maintain. For instance, studies of Thayas in Kerala show conscious efforts to westernize. Elite Thayas appropriated British culture as a move towards a more cosmopolitan life that critiqued caste. Likewise, Western education often implied opening up to new opportunities for different groups of people in the Northeast. We usually refer to the colonial impact to discuss Westernization. However, often we find new forms of Westernization in the contemporary period. Now, let us move to the next point, modernization and secularization. The term modernization has a long history from the 19th and more than so the 20th century. The term began to be associated with the positive and desirable values. People and societies wanted to be modern. In the early years, modernization referred to improvement in technology and production processes. Increasingly, however, the term had a wider uses. It referred to the path of development that much of West Europe or North America has taken, and suggested that other societies both have to and ought to follow the same path of development. In India, the beginnings of capitalism, as we saw in chapter 1, took place within the colonial context. The story of our modernization and secularization is therefore quite distinct from their growth in the West. It is evident when we discussed Westernization and the efforts of the 19th century social movements earlier in this chapter. Here we look into the two processes of modernization and secularization together, for they are linked. They are both part of a set of modern ideas. Sociologists have tried to define what exactly constitutes the modernization process. Modernity assumes that the local ties and patriarchal perspective give way to universal commitment and cosmopolitan attitudes, that the truth of utility, calculation, and science take precedence over those of the emotions, the sacred, and the non rational, that the individual rather than the group be the primary unit of society and politics, that the associations in which men live and work be based on choice, not birth, that mastery rather than fatalism orient their attitude toward the material and human environment, that identity be chosen and achieved, not ascribed and affirmed, that work be separated from family, residence, and community in bureaucratic organization. In other words, it means that the people are influenced not just by local but universal context. How you behave, what you think is no longer decided by your family or tribe or caste or community. What job you wish to do is decided not by the job your parents does, but by what you wish to do. Work gets based on choice, not birth. On whom you are depend on what you achieve, not by who you are. A scientific attitude gains ground. A rational approach matters. Is this entirely true? In India, often the job we do is not by choice. A squanger does not choose his or her job. We often marry within a caste or community. Religious beliefs continue to dominate our lives. At the same time, we do have a scientific tradition. We also have a vibrant secular and democratic political system. At the same time, we have caste and community-based mobilization. How do we understand these processes? This chapter has been trying to understand this mix. It would be simplistic, however, to term the complex combination just as a mix of tradition and modernity, as though the tradition and modernity themselves are fixed entities, or as though India has or had just one set of traditions. We have already seen that the both plurality and the tradition of argumentations have been defining features of traditions in India. They are in fact constantly being redefined. We have already observed this with 19th century social reformers. This process, however, persists today. In the modern West, secularization has usually meant a process of decline in the influence of religion. It has been an assumption of all theorists of modernization that the modern societies become increasingly secular. Indicators of secularization have referred to levels of involvement with religious organizations, the social and material influence of religious organizations, and the degree to which people hold religious beliefs. Recent years have, however, seen an unprecedented growth of religious consciousness and conflict world over. However, even in the past, a view that assumed that the modern ways would necessarily lead to decline in religious ways has not been entirely true. You will recall how Western and modern forms of communication, organization, and ideas led to the emergence of new kinds of religious reform organizations. Furthermore, a considerable part of ritual in India has direct reference to the pursuit of secular ends. Rituals have also secular dimensions as distinct from secular goals. They provide men and women with occasions for socializing with their peers and superiors, and for showing off the family's wealth, clothing, and jewelry. During the last few decades, in particular, the economic, political, and status dimensions of ritual have become increasingly conspicuous, and the number of cars lined up outside a wedding house and the VIPs who attended the wedding provide the index to the households standing in the local community. There has also been considerable debate about what is seen by some as secularization of caste. What does this mean? In traditional Indian caste system operated within a religious framework. Belief system of purity and pollution were central to its practice. Today it often functions as political pressure groups. Contemporary India has seen such formation of caste associations and caste-based political parties. They seek to press upon the state their demands. Such a changed role of caste has been described as secularization of caste. Now let us conclude the chapter. This chapter has sought to show the distinct ways that the social change has taken place in India. The colonial experience had lasting consequences. Many of these were unintended and paradoxical. Western ideas of modernity shaped the imagination of Indian nationalists. It also prompted a fresh look at traditional texts by some. It also led to a rejection of these by others. Western cultural forms found their place in spheres ranging from how families lived to what codes of conduct should men, women, and children have to artistic expressions. The ideas of equality and democracy made a huge impact, as evident in both the reform movements and the nationalist movement. This led not just to adoption of Western ideas, but also an active questioning and reinterpretation of tradition. The next chapter on the India's experience with democracy will again show how a constitution based on radical ideas of equality and social justice functioned in a society that is deeply unequal. It will further show the complex ways that both tradition and modernity constantly got and is getting redefined. Now let us wind up the session, and we have come to the end of the chapter. Thank you very much for engaging yourself with the Self Learning Podcast.